Welcome everybody. I'd like to call the Longmont Housing Authority Board of Commissioners regular meetings to order. Let's start with roll call.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Oh, Chair. Commissioner Rodriguez. Commissioner Martin.
Interim Executive Director Harold Dominguez.
Kendra Daniels, Accounting Supervisor.
Molly O'Donnell, Housing and Community Investment Director.
Lisa Gallimore, Regional Manager.
Commissioner Yarborough.
Commissioner Perry.
Two waters.
And do we have any agenda revisions and submissions of documents? Any revisions to this? No. Let's review. Are there any comments on the October 18th minutes? Any revisions to that? No. Can I have a motion to move the minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Waller, seconded by Commissioner Perry to move the October 18th, 2022 minutes. We are at public invited to be heard. We haven't voted. I'm sorry. Aye vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed. So we have a couple of public people here from the public that would like to be heard. Let's go with Matt, I guess, first. Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is Matthew Popkin. I'm a resident of Southmore Park. Recently moved to Longmont, well, I guess not recently anymore, about 18 months ago. So a year and a half sounds longer. It's a pleasure to be here and address you guys. I think it's the first time I've joined a council or commissioners meeting. I wanted to talk specifically on the energy transition, and it's relevant for today's conversation in two ways. But first, a quick background on me. My day job is working for Rocky Mountain Institute, helping cities pursue large-scale renewable energy, community solar, electrification, and resilience initiatives. This is relevant today for two reasons. The first is when we're thinking about housing and the building stock, we're looking at pricing, we're looking at costs. The more efficient that we can build our buildings and maintain existing buildings, the cheaper and more cost-effective it will be over time. The second reason is because I share this commission's, council's goals, both, in terms of 2030 long-term clean energy, not long-term, 2030 100% renewable energy goals, electrification, including the strategy recently passed by this body, technically City Council, I'm getting my commissions confused here, as well as community solar pilot project initiatives and resilience goals. Both resilience from natural hazards, heat, winter storms, as well as other geopolitical events and inflation and other costs there. In fact, some of the most cost-effective ways to reduce ongoing living expenses increasing is to address efficiency. And that's energy efficiency has been called the first, the fifth, the invisible fuel. That's been called the largest, the cheapest, the safest, and the cleanest fuel because it's just using less. And what I wanted to speak to this body today about is how we can do more to support energy efficiency in our community to achieve all of the goals that we all care about here, both for this specific commission as well as for City Council at large. The largest municipal electric utility in the country, CPS Energy, is based in San Antonio. They serve about 1.5 million people. They recently had a third-party audit done of their energy efficiency program. It was about a decade long. They found that for every dollar invested, they saved about $2. That's exactly what it means. They had a 2-to-1 benefit cost ratio for their program. I bring this up because this is incredibly important for all of the goals that the council has already set, that Longmont and PRPA have as well. I personally, when I moved here, one of the first things I did after getting over all the paperwork and buying a house was actually getting an energy audit for the Efficiency Works program that exists in this area. My experience was great. I went through and then did re-installation of my house, updated some air sealing, and made my house more efficient. That also reduced my energy bills. The Efficiency Works program estimates that about 9,000 other households, at least through 2019 when data is available, have gone through similar processes. Let's extrapolate that to today, saying about 14,000. I'll be generous and add another 5,000 throughout the pandemic. even though the program slowed down a little bit. So that's 14,000 households to date. The reason that number is important is because there are about 140,000 households across PRPA. So let's assume about 10% of households have gone through an efficiency program, excluding businesses as well, which is a small amount as well. We're looking at 10% of the community that is more efficient now. That's 90% that has a long way to go. And that's really important for all of those goals that I started off up front. So my point today is that as you consider housing overall, again, not specifically necessarily this agenda, but longer term planning for housing, longer term planning for city council retreat agenda items, and longer term planning for renewable energy targets, electrification targets, EV targets, community solar targets, resilience targets, that you consider the role that energy efficiency will have in a cost-effective energy transition for Longmont. So that's it. I completely agree with LPC's targets, PRPA's goals, this council's goals, and frankly, the goal to keep everyday living expenses more manageable. So I hope you'll consider this as you do consider multiple items going forward for long-term and short-term plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Do we have anybody else from the public that would like to speak? Arlene?
Well, first I want to thank you all for giving us some money towards grocery shopping. Maybe I can stand up. And between the LHA staff, which is mostly Lisa, and Via, who, the gal over there, her name is also Lisa, put together a grocery shopping list, or at least routes, and today was the first day that we did one. And so I thought you guys might like to kind of hear how it went. I rode the entire time with the route, and it was really exciting to me. So here are my first day things. We got a 20-passenger van, which they had originally told us we'd probably get a 10 to 12, but we got a 20-passenger van today, which is really quite nice, and they said that would probably always be what we will get, which is great, because then we can grow, okay? If at all possible, the driver today was excellent. And he's driven with Via for a long time, and he knows a lot of the people at the places, so he was really good. If at all possible, we've asked if he could be the majority of the time the driver, so we'll see how that works. We did 6 housing authority facilities today. One did not have any people who had signed up, so we did 6 of them, which, by the way, we started at 8 and ended at 2:30, so, I mean, we were going the whole time, okay? We took 21 residents. We had 7 people with walkers, 3 people with canes, and 1 person with a wheelchair, which we did not know that we were getting. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but it all worked out good. We had all ages from 90s on down, male, female. Okay. So we went today to 2 King Supers, one that's on Main and about 24th, and the other one which is over at 17th and Pace. So we went to both of those places today, which is what people had said. Now the next time that we go, which is going to be on the 17th of this month, will be to Walmart. But today we did go to King Supers. I actually went into each one of the facilities and talked to the manager and said, here we are, we're bringing in people today, and so because they only have an hour to shop, one of the things that would really help us is if you could open a line just for them, you know, to get them through, because we don't want to have to leave anybody behind. And we sort of told them that if they weren't ready to go, that they'd get left behind, but we weren't going to do that on the first day. Second day, but not the first day. And that worked out really good, because each one of the stores gave us a person and they gave us a line. So our people got through there really fast. And we had prompted them and said, you gotta be out there 5 minutes before, you know, the bus comes, and get through that line, get your stuff paid for and whatnot. So that worked out really good. So I will have to say that to King Supers, they helped us out really good today. When we go to Walmart, I think I'll ask the same question, you know, because I think that worked out really, really great. Our first pickup this morning was at 8 o'clock, and then we finally got back to our vehicles at about 2:30 this afternoon. And like I said, everybody had an hour at the store, and that worked out just right for them, because when we went to pick them up, they were ready to go. Yeah. So that has worked out really smoothly. Okay, what have we learned from today? Of course, there would be something. It looks like we may need to adjust the schedule a little bit. Via's going to work on that. We had a little bit of a break in time there where we didn't have a lot to do. And then we ended up being 15 minutes late to another one, so they'll work on that, adjusting that schedule. We need to have a good understanding of how many walkers and how many wheelchairs, because that wheelchair took a little bit of time to get it in, plus they were confused how to fix it, but anyway, it got going. We need a way to differentiate the bags. The bags, by the way, were really great. When they came out with their groceries, we had an individual bag for each one of them, so that they put them in and it wouldn't mix with anybody else's, and then we ended up with all these blue bags. And so it ended up that when we got to the place to unload them, we had to actually kind of open the bags and figure out whose was what. So we will figure out a way, and they're working on that at VIA, but I think it's probably gonna be something simple like a ribbon around the thing that, I get a red ribbon, yours is a red ribbon, and that way we don't have to open them. There were actually a couple of them that we couldn't close because they were so full. But anyway, so those are the things that right now I can think of that we learned today. And we'll always learn more as we go along. We got some excellent feedback. Many of the people said that, now I don't have to have my son or my daughter or my friend take me. If my son or daughter takes me to the store, they go through so fast I can't see anything. So they were excited about that. They got there, they can do what they want, get what they want. Everybody in the vehicles got along great. We had 4 places actually that doubled up, and they got a chance to visit with each other, and it worked out great. And then one lady, who actually was the one who was in the wheelchair, said, I haven't been grocery shopping in such a long time, this is just gonna be great. And she had a good time, she came out with a bunch of groceries. So it really was positive, and everybody liked it, and I will say this much, I really had a good time today instead of days. So I wanted you guys to know how your money's being spent, okay? And our next time, like I said, is on the 17th, we'll be going to Walmart. We will be doing 3 trips in December. 2 shopping and 1 that I keep calling a fun day, so we're all looking forward to that. So, anyway.
Is there anyone else from the public? Seeing none, we'll close public invited to be heard. We're on to old and new business, approval and adoption of the 2023 property and agency budgets.
So I'll introduce it. Kendra's gonna go through the budgets. Not sure how long Arlene's gonna stay.
Okay.
So I did wanna say this while she's still here. Arlene's a good example of the work that the board's been doing with us and where they're coming in and jumping in, and especially today when Lisa had 2 evictions and some other things, and just the support that they give us as they're working through these issues. So I wanted to say thank you to Arlene, and do that in case you left before the executive director comments. We really appreciate it.
I'm gonna stay for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Arlene.
So we're gonna start off with the budget. I'm gonna give you, obviously, this budget's more simple. As you can see from the items, we're following the same format that we followed in the past. Themes in this budget are the similar themes that we talked about for the city's budget. Labor cost, inflation creeping in terms of utilities and maintenance, and that ate up probably most of the revenue that we were looking at. As you look at each one of these sections, one of the things I would say is think of each one of the residential units as a separate fund in the way on the city side that we think about the water fund versus a general fund. Because we have to stay true within each one of those budgets. That's why at the end of some of these you'll see more narrow margins that we're dealing with, and we will get into some of those specifics. Kendra's going to talk about a rental increase. We haven't seen one for a while. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kendra, and then I'm going to jump in as she's moving through the slides.
So we're going to start out with what is kind of new in the budget and what increases that are happening within the budget. So the first one is the rent increases. We did have to look at every single property and along with do some analysis on like, we haven't done an increase forever. Like what is the tax credit went up? And so I'll show you some slides of that. But for the Hearthstone and the Lodge, that is strictly, we give it to HUD. They approve our budget and they give us what we get increased. Usually they only give you 4%. The first one they sent back, I asked for an appeal which was the lodge. They had us at, I think, 605, and I got it up to 641. Because there were some things that they were taking out of the budget that just wasn't gonna work. They were trying to take insurance out, that's a given, we have to pay that. You know, some of the salaries and wages, we're gonna have to pay that. So he did push it back through and got a 7.49. So that is gonna be right now it's at 593. It's gonna be at 641 for the lodge, is the rent. But it doesn't affect any of the residents there because that increase is basically absorbed by HUD. It's the subsidy side of the voucher because these individuals are already paying at their limits. So whatever HUD gives us is more than likely gonna be subsidy unless their income increases or Social Security goes up and stuff like that. There's some fluctuation there. The Hearthstone increase we just got on Friday and they gave us 7.2%. He did see that the Hearthstone had the biggest struggles. And when we first came on, we weren't able to pay bills. It was, you know, let's not pay Longmont Housing Authority, let's not pay Longmont Housing Authority. So, but we are at a more stable process right now. So that's the way those two work. We send it to HUD, we ask for the increase, we give notices to the tenants get all the information that we've submitted to HUD so they can see it too, along with, we give them a synopsis of what we're increasing. The next one is.
So before you go, this.
Yeah.
The launch in Hearthstone was an interesting learning experience for us because you have to announce the rental, you have to tell them there's a rental increase. First time we did this, we weren't as adept at saying, here's a rental increase, but you're not going to absorb any of it because we were brand new to this and weren't sure of the nuances. And so we fine-tuned our communication. And so we have to notify them. Molly and I met, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the executive director's report, but we had a really big audit last week with HUD, and we got to talk to them, and it was also a chance for us to talk to them about what the budget issues are, what's driving it. And it's, you know, they never really had snow removal. So we brought snow removal in. We went to parks and said, how many events of snow do we normally have in a year? They said 8 events. Difference was we shovel at 1 inch, they shovel at like 2 to 3. And so it caused some issues. So we were able to meet with the auditor and he's the one that does the budget to kind of, for next year, prep him. They said, we're still catching up because they never asked for increases before we got involved in that process. And okay, go for it. All right.
You referred to were tenants, residents. Early in your comments, you said your rates are going up. That was a message to tenants?
So we have to, no, we tell the tenants that the rent is going up. Your is HUD, because HUD actually pays for it. So the tenants never have a rental increase.
I get that.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to clarify who the communication is.
So the first time it was, your rent's going up, HUD's gonna pay for it, and we had to fine tune this to say, rent's going up, but HUD's paying for this, this will not impact you individually, yeah. So.
And they get a comment period, so we say, we are requesting, and I had 10% on one and I had 8% on another. We're requesting on these two properties. I'm requesting an 8% increase. Here's why. You have access to all the information. This is your public comment period, and you can reach out to our HUD rep. We give the information to contact him directly. So if they have any comments or concerns, they can reach out to them as well. So that's all in the notice that we tape on their doors or on the little cookie things when you don't see the cookie things.
Commissioner Martin. Thank you. Interim. Because you said unless Social Security goes up, but Social Security is going up?
So that's a different issue in terms of the rest of the properties, and we'll go over that.
Okay. And that would affect these properties as well. But what that means is when they go to certification, if they did get the Social Security increase, it would just be recertifying their income. their income would show an increase, and so their rent versus their subsidy is adjusted because of that. And that's with any subsidy-based unit. So the next one is
I
most.
think we had another question.
Well, just to clarify, the number, you used the number 6.05, I think, a couple of ways with respect to the law. Just want to be clear. You proposed a 10% increase, they came back with 6.05 or 6.
Yeah, so the law.
And what we settled was the 7.4.
Yeah, that's what they went back and they gave us some more.
Well, wasn't there a flipping back and forth between the dollar amount and the percentage increase?
Yes, yeah, so if they lower the amount, so they basically came back, they have $593.
That's
They said,
dollars.
That's dollars. So right now their rent is $593. We requested $644 to go up to that. They came back with a letter that said, we're gonna give you $605, and they give you the analysis, like, here's why we're giving you it, and then I pushed back and said, we have to have this.
That was the, you went from dollars to percentages, from 6.05
Yeah, yeah.
dollars to 10.
Sorry. So the next one is our tax credit properties. So Aspen Meadows Senior Apartments, Aspen Meadows Neighborhood, Briarwood, Fall River, Spring Creek, and Village Place. We are, in this budget, doing a 4% rental increase. That will only affect those individuals that aren't at the tax credit rent right now. And so, for example, if somebody moved in today, we would move them in as the tax credit rent as of today. So if come April of 2023, the tax credit rent only goes up 3%, then they would only see a 3% increase, because we can't go above that tax credit rent. So you're either gonna get 4 or you could get less depending on your timing or how long you've been, in these properties. And this is why. So what we did is we looked at the tax credit increases that have occurred from 2018 to 2022. We know we haven't had any rental increases during that time period. As you can see, in 2018, but it went up 452, and then 116, and 163, and then in 2021, it jumped up to 669. And then in 2022, 350. So we kind of looked at what is the average of all of those 5 years to come up with an increase that would help them. So we're not just, we need 17%, because that's what we were looking at, almost 17%, and we haven't increased every year. When you do that, you kind of put yourself in a pickle because everything else is increasing, but your rents aren't, so it's really hard to pay for stuff. And you're not coming down to a net income that gives you cash flow surplus to pay developer fees or to fill a capital improvement. You know, they didn't set up a lot of these properties with any type of capital improvement reserve. And they really probably should. We're gonna have to replace the roof on many of these units at Aspen Meadows neighborhood, but Aspen Meadows neighborhood doesn't have barely any reserve at all. So what we'd like to try to do is get to that point where we can start building that reserve as well. To kind of give you an analysis, I looked at one of our properties, one of the properties that we seem to have a struggle with. And this will, so the yellow right here is their actual subsidy amount. The gray is what they pay. The orange is what their, the potential rent, so it's basically the subsidy plus their rent, but then the blue is tax credit. So for these ones that have HCV, they have subsidy, we're either over or we could be under. And the reason being is it wasn't common practice for these properties to say, I can go up to the market rent with these subsidies. They were keeping it stagnant, so they weren't increasing the subsidies and bringing the money in. That's kind of the situation with this number 2. Then you have a tax credit here where you see this is what they're paying, this is where the rent's at today, but this is where the tax credit is. And this is just a subset of a property. You pull it all together, it's all out of whack. And then you can see when these people, so this person what is from 2013, that's when they moved in. So from 2013, this is their jump. So depending on when you moved in, if you were in 2007 or 2013, you could have a really big jump or a really small jump. This one down at the bottom, this is a vacant unit. So this vacant unit right now, if somebody moves in, we can get this rent. And that's the not the anticipation, but if somebody moves out and it's a vacant unit, you can get that tax credit rent back up. But for the people that have been there in longevity, getting them up to that is gonna take some time. And for some of these properties that are so, and you know, there was, and I'm sure you can speak to this, is that they weren't being brought in at the rent that they should have been paying. And therefore, that's also been a struggle as well. And these will also tell you what kind. This is a 1-bedroom at 50% AMI. This is a 2-bedroom at 50%. I mean, so this kind of shows you what we could be getting, and where we're at. So that's kind of what we also had to look at, like, what's a good increase? And that was a struggle, but it seemed like 4% gave us some really good revenue to match up with the expenses that we're seeing and the increases across the board, to help at least also have a capital improvement reserve, and as we've all talked for many times, a meth reserve as well, because we're going to have to probably start building up that as well.
So the sum of actual subsidy, you mean the amount sum, not added sum?
Yeah, so this,
Okay.
yes.
So that yellow bar is what HUD is paying us now. And the blue bar is what HUD would pay us if we could justify it.
The blue bar is tax credit, so that's different.
Yeah, that's
Tax
different.
credit is usually lower, as you can see even on this one. Tax credit is usually lower than the actual market rent, which is what you're allowed to go up to for a unit that has a subsidy voucher.
Yes, it's for that
Okay.
unit, I just wanna jump in, that unit that she's showing, the 1-bedroom 60%, we should, looks like we're only getting about 1,200 with subsidy, and we could actually be getting 1,417.
So what do we have to go through to make that adjustment? So the actual rent, the gray, is what the tenant is paying. And the subsidy is either from the tax credit or
Subsidy would be
From
from
the
a voucher
voucher.
program.
from the voucher.
So let me, we finished this last week right before I left, trying to figure it out. So under a voucher program, you charge the market rent.
Yes, only
And-
we're not always getting it.
No,
Okay.
we're not, they haven't historically done that. So you can charge the market rent, then the voucher will pay the portion of that market rent, and then they make up the difference, which is smaller. Under a tax credit property, you have certain tax credit limits that are below the market rent in most cases. And then they pay a portion of it. If they don't have a voucher, then they pay a portion of what they qualify based on the tax credit rent. And there's so many iterations in this based on individuals, because every individual brings in their own characteristics and what you're dealing with.
Which is their ability to pay.
Pay, because it's all about their ability to pay. And so what happens is, what Kendra's talking about is, so what we realized when you look at the inflationary pressures and all of these other issues, that when you, and we think it was 2017 when they last did a rent increase, but we're not sure. So you go potentially 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, that's kind of when we jumped in. So you have all of those years where they haven't incrementally been raising the rents, but every other expense has been going up. And so then you see the compression within the budget that we're dealing with. And so there's no way that we could, in a good conscience, have gone in and said, oh, here's 17%. It just wouldn't work. And so that's why they were looking at this, knowing that we can adjust on a number of occasions when people move out, when you have evictions, mortality, all of those issues and then being on top of it when you're replacing those units.
And when social security goes up, because it affects people's ability to pay.
So different issues. So then, as an individual, every year you have to recertify for your unit. And so when you recertify as part of your unit, you have to come in and go, here's my income. Then based on your income profile, what you physically pay changes in the recertification, which really makes this even more complicated. Because think of recertification as when you signed your lease. So if I signed my lease in November, I'm not recertifying until November of 2023, which means you have to budget your rent that they're paying for 11 months before the new rents take into account on recertification. And so you're managing about 10 different variables trying to figure out the revenue stream in this, because you have individual profiles, you have individual dates of contract dates, you have tax credit limits, you have market rate, you have the vouchers playing into this, and so all of those are different for every individual person.
And when we came on board, they were not going up to the market rents on any of the vouchers at all. So that was something Tracy noticed and researched, and that's how we stood.
And we did make that
When we get there,
adjustment.
we have to do that on
Yeah.
the certification, you can't just, blast it and do it. So, growing pains. So the next piece of it.
Could I just make one observation and just one question? There was at least one rate increase since 2018. It was, I don't recall the year. I think it was when Jillian had arrived, but just so for the record. When a new tenant signs a lease, whose decision is it is it totally formulaic or algorithmic, what that rate is? So how could it be that we have residents over time who are not paying what the algorithm or the formula would suggest they should? How does that happen?
So,
Go ahead.
so the issue was, and this is why you want to pay the money, this is why in salary, we talked about having the right property managers. Property managers weren't bringing them in at the right rates. And there was, when you talk about audits and lack of internal controls in those processes, there was a lot of freelancing going on when they were signing people to their contracts.
I suspected that would be the answer. So where I immediately go, and my thinking is, wouldn't that be one of a number of metrics we would use to evaluate performance of property managers or community managers?
Right.
And since that's come up a couple of times, and we've never seen metrics, and we've never talked about evaluation criteria, just wondering, will this show up at some point in time? And in what way? As part of a criteria and a metric for the evaluation of the performance of.
This one's actually easier to fix because Kendra can lock it down.
Well, fixing it is one thing. Accountability and since it really rests with property management.
Actually does it. That's what we're trying to say. So now, in what you can do in the Yardi system is Kendra can lock those fields down to where when the property managers sign a contract, they can't adjust it.
So that won't be their decision.
No, not going forward.
Still interested in metrics,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah, we found that it wasn't locked down recently and had to lock it down.
One more comment, then we need to move on.
Yeah, well, is that calling on me?
Yes.
Why would anyone want to freelance? Why wouldn't they just put it in at the recommended?
Because they can fill that unit faster. So say you have a 2-bedroom that typically rents for $1,600, and you're calling your wait list, and nobody wants to pay that, nobody wants to pay that, nobody wants to pay that. Then we're like, well, I'll give it to you for $1,000. Then that person's gonna take it, and we're losing $600 per month on that unit.
And how much are we losing while it's unoccupied?
1,600.
Yeah.
So that's a different analysis that you have to go through. So to talk about the metrics and what you're looking at is, that's not necessarily a decision that is not a decision that needs to be made at that level. That needs to come to Lisa, Kendra, and then ultimately me, because it's one thing if the property's vacant for 2 weeks and then you cut them a deal. It's another thing if it's vacant for a longer period of time.
So there are metrics in there, but they're more complicated than.
Well, those are things we gotta build into the system.
Well, I think to the snapshot, we can start doing these snapshots, which would let you know progress and time, you know, where this unit was at this point, where it was at this point. So I think with building metrics, we're just not fully there yet.
Okay.
For the suites are a little different. They have project-based vouchers in all of their units. Half of them are LHAs, half of them are MHPs. We have to go to DOLA because DOLA is the overseer of our public funding for MHP, and they give us the approval to increase the vouchers. So there's a little different. So we did get approval. The efficiency apartments is like at 18.68%. Currently they are running at 1,036, but they're approved us to go to 1,274. This is the same type of property as the 202 properties, the Hearthstone and the Lodge, because they're all subsidy based, every single unit. Unless your income goes up, your rent's not going to change, and it's going to the increase is going to be absorbed by the subsidy agency. The one bedroom is about 17.65. They're letting us increase it to 1,428, and so this is just kind of a key that they were never going to DOH and asking for the increases every year as the market rents change. And then the 2-bedroom, it really didn't give us approval here. I don't know why. I don't know if MHP.
We only have two bedrooms. So
Yeah,
that might
so
have fallen
I
off.
just kind of did an average in between, and so we're moving that one from 1420 to 1678. We do have to notify the tenants of these increases that are going to happen, and I imagine those will be going out in the next couple months, or not months, weeks. Sorry. So those are kind of what's in the budget for rent increases. The other items is LHA has added a police component to our budget. We are going to be contributing a percentage of pay to the City of Longmont's police position to help assist with law enforcement. That's already really at our properties quite a bit. And so we are helping.
Let me take this. So, in looking at many of the issues that we all are dealing with, whether it's evictions, behaviors, all of those issues, Sarah Arnie has been spending a fair amount of time. So what we're looking at is really going in and paying I think it's about 50% of a position, so we can, and Zach and I have talked about this, so we can get dedicated support to assist us. And specifically, there's a lot of times when evictions are going on and things in the properties that Lisa needs help on, that I can't attend or that Molly can't attend. This position will be doing that. And really working on the components of crime-free multifamily housing, but taking some of that load of the things that we jump in to help Lisa with, and really taking that off of us as we're trying to move up into more of the development work and things like that. So we tried to look at doing a full position, but financially just couldn't do it this year. So we thought that 50% was a good starting point in this, and Zach and I have to work through some issues on that, but it's really to assist a lot of things that normally we go out to help Lisa with.
I have a question. So, so how does that leave the police department? I know we're already understaffed with the police department, so if we're paying for 2 officers 50% of their pay, so that means 50% of their time will be with the LHA properties, and I'm not saying you all don't need it, because I totally get it, but then I'm also looking at the fact that we are spending extra money for the police department so that we can get police officers and also retain those police officers as well. So where does that leave the department with those officers?
This essentially makes them whole versus kind of what we've been doing now. So it's $1 for $1, and so what we wanted to do was to do 100%, and then we could get that position for us and working with us, and then they hire another position at an entry level and a lower level. This is 50%. The delta between entry level police officer and what we're paying is more narrow, and then we're gonna work on trying to fill that out so that we can add a body to get eventually a body back in. So they don't lose anything out of this.
And I think the
To that
50%,
point,
yeah.
is we didn't wanna negatively impact them, and honestly, you know, I talked to Zach and Sarah about this, and we are, you know, I am specifically talking about bringing Sarah in to work with us because she's been in these meetings, she's in every meeting with us on every Friday. She's doing a lot of this work, which we can get a little bit more out of it. To be honest, it makes my life a little bit easier, makes Molly's life a little bit easier, but it also avoids paying overtime that we're paying now for some of the work that she's having to do beyond the normal hours that she has in the public safety department. But know that we're trying to hit that 100% mark on this one.
Well, and I think technically with her position, the 50% actually gives you one of the lower level police officers to help.
The margins are more narrow, so.
So the increases, we're having increases across the board, same thing with salary and benefits. We were seeing anywhere from 6 to 12%. Some of them were lower, but we kind of kept, we have a situation with the housing authority where only maybe 6 or 7 housing authorities submit to the employers council. So you could have one submit one year that has these increases, and you have another one that has, you know, lower pay. And you don't know what areas or what regions they're in. They just say 7 submitted. So we went with the same process, a minimum of 6 and a max of 12. Because we did have some that were over 12, but we wanted to make sure and to be also included in the cities.
Yeah, we were seeing the same data integrity issues from Mountain States. It's interesting. Gina was at a meeting with multiple cities, and every city was saying the same thing. So we're all trying to go out and find the Mercers of the world. And so when we looked at this, there were some positions that made absolutely no sense to us that the data was saying they were ahead of market, because we knew from a practical standpoint we weren't. And so we took the same compensation approach that we did with the city for the same, exactly the same reasoning on this, and then they are included in the Mercer study as well, so that we could make sure that we have an accurate data set on this. But in terms of the data, this is, you know, there were multiple cities fussing about the same data issues that we talked about in the city's top plan.
Utilities are looking at an increase of about 5%. Insurance is increasing. What we noticed and what we actually had our broker do is, what I noticed last year was that our insurance amounts, the amounts that we were assuring the building for, if we had a total loss situation, we would not be able to rebuild based on the amount that they were insuring for those businesses. So they kind of did an analysis and said, hey, based on this, based on your square footage, you really should be at like 200 a square foot. And we were probably half and half. There were probably half of the properties that were close. There were half that weren't. There was one that was really bad, which was Village Place. So, and Village Place has the most negative equity. So we're trying to build that up and increase it over, over time, so that we can get to a point where and we should be increasing it. You know, I talked to the risk of the city. We should be increasing it every year because things are going to change. Construction market has changed. We're going to have increases due to inflation across the board, and that's hitting we're seeing 4 to 5% for most of our vendors. And then we're trying to, if we do have money, we're going to have some meth reserves added as well as capital reserves. My banker's going to be really happy with me, and I'm going to have to set up a lot of accounts. And have more signatures. So we'll start off with Aspen Meadows campus. That's the Aspen Meadows Senior Apartments in Aspen Meadows neighborhood. The senior apartments is one of the properties that is struggling revenue-wise, and that's because of the resyndication. You know, you already had people in at a certain rent amount, and it was really hard based on the performance to bring them in at the new rent amount. So there's a struggle there that we're not actually where we need to be. So that one is not having a MEF reserve or a capital improvement reserve right now, because we're not gonna have much after, replacement reserve requirements. Aspen Meadows neighborhood is looking actually pretty good. And I think might be better once, I know we had some issues with Aspen Meadows neighborhood where people were in units that had smaller voucher size. So they were in a 4-bedroom, but they had a voucher of 1, is that right?
2-bedroom.
2-bedroom voucher in a 4-bedroom. So I know they've been moving people around just so that we can, get the amount that, because you can't, if you have a 2-bedroom voucher, that's as far as, you don't get any more than that. But you're in a 4-bedroom unit, so we're actually losing money on that.
Well, to the point earlier, in terms of how do you evaluate that you're putting someone in the appropriate unit size that the voucher's for versus moving them to, you have a 2-bedroom voucher and you're putting them in a 4-bedroom. And so that's an evaluation component.
So how are you making that transition with the tenant? Are they accepting that? Are they?
You might be able to speak to this better, but I think what happens is when we have a unit that opens up, that is a 2-bedroom, we have to say, otherwise you're gonna have to pay that additional rent.
And Tracy's been really good with the housing team. As she's seen it, they're doing the recertification. She's letting Ruby and the HCV team is letting them know, hey, you're overhoused basically, or you're underhoused. You have 2 people in a 4-bedroom that doesn't meet the criteria when one comes available. So they're getting plenty of notice that way. And then as soon as we get notice from a tenant, we're letting them know, hey, we received this notice. We expect the unit to be ready about this time. And so that they can start planning, or if they don't want to move to another unit on our site, they can take their voucher and move somewhere else as well.
So, and remember that starts touching HUD when you have a 2-bedroom voucher and they're in a 4-bedroom, and then that comes back if you have them in the wrong unit size based on the voucher piece and some of the HUD work that we're doing.
Somebody have a question about the Aspen campus?
So one of the things I wanted to talk about, so you can see in the bottom when we're looking at the net income, this is where the rental rates come in. This is where, so when we look at this, what you will see is Aspen Meadow Apartments, we weren't able to increase tenant services, which is really the work that we do to create an activity budget and things like that, because their margins were so narrow. If you look at, and you can see this in some of the others, we know from the survey work that the board did in terms of wanting, more things in the units. You can see that we did push up in Aspen Meadows neighborhood, increased it by $1,500. Watching the net income, trying to hit the reserves, so you can see the reserve replacement. The reserve replacement's required. That's required from the tax credit component. But you can see on the neighborhood that we've added $10,000 to start building a MEF reserve and $15,000 to start building a capital replacement reserve. You don't see that on the other side because they didn't have the financial capability to do it. What's really important is we also have to watch the net income, because the net income can hit you in a couple of ways. So you want to generate enough net income so that it pays the, what's the word, the developer fees and the tax credit component.
Yeah, so you want to have cash flow surplus at the end of the year, or even during the year, so that you can actually pay the developer fees back to the LHA. The suites, Aspen Meadows Senior Apartments, and Fall River all have developer fees that are due to either LHA or LHTC. The suites, when we came on, was almost $1 million, and they haven't been able to pay. We're down to 600,000, 650. But they could have been paying it if they would have been asking for those subsidy rent increases. If we're not paying those developer fees, then we're not cushioning our general fund to be able to pay for the administration, because the management fees alone at these properties do not suffice the administration that we are currently paying for today.
And then on the tax credit side, it's sort of pay me now, pay me later. And and Pay Me Later comes in, and this is something we're dealing with at Village Place, is because historically they never made that ramp up. They were never paying that money into the equity investor, right?
Correct,
So then when
developer fees owed including to the equity
developer fees owed including to the equity investor. So when you go into re-syndication, if you haven't paid that money back, then what happens is you have to pay that money at re-syndication, which then takes away from what you can actually put into rehab the property.
So next is Fall River and Spring Creek. They are looking good with 4% increase. Realizing that we do not budget for the HCD vouchers because those are portable. So if there are HCD vouchers in these properties, we could have more income at the end of the year because we're not counting for that, because if they decide to leave, then we don't have that money. So we don't want to budget for that.
And that's actually the cushion that from a cash flow perspective, when you look at the financials for most of these properties, we're doing well. It's because we're not budgeting for that HCD piece because you don't know how long it'll be there. So that ends up bolstering the actual cash flow into each one of these properties' financials.
And the increased revenue gives us increased management fees, but the management fees are based on the gross receipts for every property. Downtown campus is also looking good with both Village Place and the Briarwood Apartments. So I don't see any problems there.
Negative income.
This is basically saying that the variance between 2022 and 2023, we have 11,000 in revenue, but we're going to have 22,000. In retrospect, we're still going to be okay net income wise at the end of the year, but yes, based on the analysis from year to year, we have more expenses than we have.
Well, if you look at it, we had 54,000, we're down to 41, but we're creating a 5,000 meth reserve and a 5,000 capital improvement reserve. So you take the 10 off of the 54, so now you're down to 44, and that's 10,000 in the net income difference.
Yeah, part of it too is we did refinance the Briarwood.
Yes. What is the typical expenditure when you have to do a meth restoration for 1 unit?
It can range anywhere from $1,000 to $100,000.
$170,000, so it just.
So the out-of-pocket expense via the insurance, yeah, it could be, so if it's a cleaning, we're probably not gonna make an insurance claim because that, you don't wanna hit your experience on that.
And our
So-
deductible's $5,000, so.
And so if it's under 5,000, we cover it. If it's over.
Out of the meth reserve or?
Yeah, we will start being able to do it out of a meth reserve that we're trying, because these are ongoing dollars that we're using, so we're gonna start incrementally stepping into it. But yeah, it could be, if it's cleaning, it could be $1,000. If it's the significant one that we talked to you all about the next time, that could probably be $50,000-$60,000 out of pocket in addition to the insurance covering the remaining component of it. So that's probably gonna be somewhere in the neighborhood of a $200,000 remediation.
Basically, just building a new unit.
Yeah, because we have to test the, actually, in that one, it was so high, I think they tested the studs.
Yeah.
We got that back?
No, they just tested the studs yesterday.
And there is some health and safety remediation budgeted in each one of these in the maintenance and operations. This is just extra money we're putting aside, if we have enough cash flow surplus to do that. And that's watching the budgets on a quarterly basis to make sure that it happens. Over campus, these are our 202 properties. As you can see, we can't budget anything for that because they pretty much bring us down to a zero balance. They don't give us more than that, so. Not much I can say on that one. And then you have the suites. And the suites is where, those were really huge increases with that subsidy. That's gonna be it was almost 200 a unit. So, that's gonna be really big.
if we can get that in, and that'll, help pay those developer fees, so.
And that's important because that comes back into LHDC and the LHA general fund budget, which is, as we're looking at development and other things, reduces the amount of fund balance that we have to historically use on an annual basis. And so we're shifting into more of what I call a traditional cash flow model, where you're not relying on fund balance, but you're bringing the revenue in on an annual basis to do it.
So how was the old LHA able to deficit spend on this scale?
Well, I mean, that's why they couldn't retain staff, because they didn't have enough to give, they weren't even nearly close to market for all of their staffing positions. So, I mean.
Oh, so they were not paying the staff, or they were underpaying the staff because they couldn't underpay their contractors?
They weren't fully staffed.
Yeah.
So if you look at what we're doing today versus the system that was set up, so we have full-time property managers at every location. We now have, how many assistant city managers? Two?
One in the works.
So we have 2 funded assistant managers to do rotational coverage on those units, and so they were doubling up on some of them. And so you would have one manager managing 4 properties. So you didn't have one per property. You didn't have, and so on the other side of it, because of the audit issues, when we had the lack of internal controls, they had a CFO, an accounting tech, and that was it. And that's why they weren't doing their stuff. So now we have an accounting supervisor, an accountant, and an accounting tech position to deal with those issues. So we've actually gone from, in this budget, from deficit spending and not having the staff to bringing everything into the black and adding the staff. And that's part of the contract with the city, to where even though they're paying the city now $130,000,
Yeah, it's about
130,000, it's the work that we're coming in and solidifying there that is allowing for the market rate salaries and the appropriate staffing levels to get the work done. I mean, the reality is, and I've talked to some of you all, they go, we need an assistant, but we do. This is a ton of work, but there's no money to do it, and we've got to build that stream in so that we can do it, and it's just this incremental approach on an annual basis.
The simple answer to all that is LHA was totally dependent on development fees.
Correct.
And as development tailed off, every year it was a deficit budget subsidized by development fees, and all of the rent adjustments that we've heard about weren't being made. So you just keep cutting back on staffing and compensation, because you had less and less in reserve. When LHA approached the city, the end was clear, right? We were about to go down the proverbial
Pipe.
Yeah.
Councilmember Waters was on that board, and when this happened, we talked. It's a classic death spiral.
Yeah.
I mean, to give you a sense of, and it wasn't at the top of the death spiral. I think it was probably in the bottom quarter of the death spiral in terms of where this was heading, and it's just. And so now so connecting the budget to the development side, when we talk about that update, you're seeing why we're pressing so hard on development, because we've got to get in. I mean, we're drawing on the general fund, she'll show you this. We're drawing down on fund balance, but we know we have development fees coming in early in 23 to replenish, but we've got to get that cycle moving so that we're bringing it in, and that's why we're so adamant in that we take over the management component of it, so we can get the management fees that move into the general fund to then have that annual cash flow. And if it's okay, I'm gonna let you go. I've got to take a break.
Yeah, and the increase in rent increases the management fees that come in. So if you weren't doing any type of rental increase, then our management fee was never increasing, yet all of our costs to keep staff on was. So it's a trickle effect. So the next is our housing choice voucher program. Right now, we're just kind of budgeting what they've actually analyzed on our 2-year tool. It could be different once it comes, once they finalize it at the end of probably January, February timeframe. But right now, we're still looking okay. I think we're looking at, we budgeted for about 425 vouchers a month. We're at 409, but I think we have like almost 20 in process. I mean, it's taking people a really long time to find a place that takes a voucher. So, and they stay on that waiting list for, you know, they get exceptions. They come for, you know, can I have an extension for another month to find a place? It's just, the rent here is just so high. It just can't accommodate what our voucher will supply. So, and a lot of people are trying to get, a lot of people like out from outside will try to get a voucher at another city just so they can port out somewhere else, but they have to stay here for a year. And that's part of our admin plan. So
if the voucher is supposed to pay up to market less what the person's ability to pay is, which is not tied to the regional rent, then why don't the vouchers?
Because landlords don't charge market rent. So you have a landlord that charges $1,800, market rent's $1,400. That's what we can provide. So then you have to tell that, like, we can provide you with a $1,400 voucher, but you have to come up with that other $400 that your landlord's wanting you to pay. So that's the problem. And we'll get to that piece of it. It's on the agenda. HUD has came down with, like, you can go up to such and such. It doesn't have to be 100%. I think they said you could go up to 120.
It's 110.
Oh, we're only doing 105.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
The max is 110.
110. So you can go up to 110, and we are going to be going up to 105. That's part of our approval to at least be able to do that. And maybe that can help us find some people, but probably not all.
So just for the sake of explanation, when you're talking about market rent and that concept, you're talking about some sort of formula that states what market rent is, should be. HUD's definition of market rent versus actual market.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And they try, you know, it's when you pull up market rent, you pick your state, your area, and this is what it tells you that area is, but it's not.
What was the number of vouchers you mentioned?
We have about 409, I think is my last, that we actually have, we're paying out right now. And then we have 11 that are for ins. We don't pay for that, those are out of our budget. But there's like, I think 20 that are still searching, trying to find a place.
And we have resources if they can find a place to take the voucher.
Yeah, I mean, then we give them landlords or agencies that best work with, and there's some agencies that don't seem to want to work with vouchers, so we try not to push too much in that direction.
There's a voucher to issue if
they find a spot.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about this in the executive director update. Over the last 3 to 4 weeks, it's been happening incrementally, but it hit us really hard in the last month and a half in terms of the number of people that are now approaching the housing authority in some sort of partnership. And one of those Molly met with, and they're specifically saying, we have openings, we have vouchers. And so it's now bringing those folks together, but we'll talk a little bit about it because talked about it the last time. We're going to give you all some updates in our conversations.
So the next is our single room occupancy. This is also a voucher program, but it's specifically for the in-between. The in-between has a single, it was a rehab voucher that they went for. Theirs is decreasing, and the reason it's decreasing is they only had 8 units, and they only need like $500, which we budget like almost $800. So what you don't use, HUD takes back. So it's better to try to budget closer to the rent than it is, so that's why you see a decrease happening as well for the single room occupancy. Then we have the Longmont Housing Authority owned properties, which is 615 Main and Briarwood Office. Briarwood Office is pretty much really tight with only $74 left of net income. We need to, I know there's discussions about actually both these properties, about selling both of these properties, so I don't know. You'll get an executive report.
Well, and we can go ahead and talk about it here. So 615 Main is the office building that's adjacent to Village Place Apartments. And if you all remember, it was incredibly unclear as to the status of that property as it related to Village Place and the tax credits. It was on the LHA, and showing under the ownership of LHA, but it was intermingled with the Village Place tax credits, and that's an LHDC property, which in that, in the dissolving of LHDC, when we do the resyndication, the Village Place group units were going to come into the LHA, but this was already showing on the LHA. And what was his name? The board member of LHDC?
Oh, Stephen Morgan.
Stephen Morgan, who does tile work, was even struggling trying to figure out what happened. So we finally figured all of that out, and it is not part of the resyndication issue on Village Place. So this is the property that Center for People with Disabilities leases from us. They have expressed an interest in purchasing that property. We now think it's clear enough where we're going to, and if the board is okay with this, we would like to entertain conversations in terms of selling that property, engaging in conversations with Center for People with Disabilities, just because of the operational costs associated with it. It would be a budgetary, a positive budgetary impact into the broader LHA fund.
What would we be losing if we sold it? Would we?
Not much. 20, I mean, if you look at it, we're netting $5,000 annually out of rent and expenses on that one. And so I think selling it, reducing the insurance expense, the maintenance and operations, and all of that, I think would. But again, we'll talk to them and see if they're interested. We want to make sure that they're taken care of and that this is well ahead of that facility. But our recommendation would be is that we look at selling that property. Are there any questions on that one?
I just know there's a great interest in purchasing it.
Yeah.
Because they contacted me several times. I don't know yet.
Yeah, and we weren't sure. I mean, we were really concerned that if it were intertwined in with the resyndication, we were going to be tied up in that one. Briarwood office is slightly different. That's obviously the space that we're leasing to the Veterans Community Project. They've made some really good improvements to that property. We partnered with them. I think as we look more broadly at this, we might want to have some conversations, but honestly, I think we need to get some projects built so that we can gain units before we look at that. And so we'll be talking to them about expenses and things like that in the near future.
So we have the LHA general fund. So LHA has about almost $800,000 in expenditures that are incurred. And we always usually have to take from fund balance because we don't have enough revenue coming in.
Right now, the revenue coming in at 521,164 is literally the management fees and LHDC's corporate management fee. So, which is $150,000. So when LHDC dissolves, we'll only have the management fees. So we're gonna be losing some revenue on their side. We would also be transferring whatever developer fees, their investments that they have, to LHA as well. But right now, we have to use $400,000 of our fund balance. Our fund balance as of, was about $700,000. So 400 would bring us down to 300. But as long as we're getting some developer fees from the suites, in 2024, we'll be getting some developer fees from Chrisman too. So that'll help. And that'll probably be in the budget next year for 2024, but we definitely have to not only start building to get developer fees in, but finding, and I think you've commented, is getting an additional revenue source that's just always coming in.
And notice that, so there's a net income in this of 123, so we're not planning on spending that 123,000. But when you have a lot of times the meth remediation and things like that, and you have your deductible you have to hit, that's a piece of it. And so,
We just wanted a cushion in case we need,
in the budget
with lawyer costs and all of that.
Right.
We just want to make sure that we have a cushion if we need to add any expenditures, that we have that cushion.
And so on the attorney side, you all approved an additional, as the city council, you all approved an additional housing attorney. And making that work within the city's budget, we're pushing $30,000 from the legal fees that we have in this budget to help cover the cost on that attorney. And we're hoping that with the work we do there, it reduces the amount of attorney expenses that we're paying. Because if anything, we will only contract out for evictions, but not all of the other work that we're doing, which is incredibly expensive. So we should, in the legal fees, see some changes there.
And then we have LHDC. LHDC is the same situation. We do have to use fund balance, about $225,000. And realize 150 of that is LA money sent to LHA for the corporate management fee. So they also, but that's, I mean, we have to use fund balance there as well. Now they have investments, you know, they were actually putting money back as they got developer fees and putting in investment. So they have about 1.3 of investments, but they're in CDs. So we can't pull those out until they mature. But we definitely want to be able to use that as they dissolve and be able to forecast what is needed, what kind of developer revenue we need, what kind of stable revenue can we get, so that we can kind of stabilize and then maybe get somebody to take some stuff off your plate. But I mean, I don't know what that is as of today, what the stable revenue could be, unless it's more properties with more management fees coming in.
That's it.
Can I just, let me ask a quick question. We don't see legal fees broken out as a separate line item as an expense.
Correct.
Where do we account for that?
It is it's in the admin expense. If you looked at the detail, it is budgeted there. There's about $70,000.
I assume that's where it would be.
Yeah.
I think in terms of moving forward with budgeting and accounting, since we are now contract, or as part of the arrangement with the city, we're allocating $30,000 of this budget to support legal support, and pay for legal support. Well, in my opinion, we got to account for that separately than just whatever else is in that line of administration.
We talked about that. We were teasing each other today on that issue to pull that out so we know what we have in terms of outside counsel for eviction.
Similar to what we do with the consultants.
Yeah. That's
But are you wanting to see like it's a separate line item here to say like legal services?
If we budgeted, is that distributed, or is the $30,000 budgeted in each of the administrative expenses
Yeah.
across all the properties?
Yeah.
Then I think it ought to be pulled out, frankly, into a line in the general fund. Now, I'm not an accountant somewhere, but to have it distributed, there is no way. How would you answer a question for me, or how could I answer my own question, looking at a financial report at the end of the year on what our legal expenses were for 2023?
We have a separate line item for legal expenses.
Where is it?
So this is a roll up. So under admin expense, there's a whole list of items.
Where do we see this?
It's in the big one, it's in that big
Yeah.
one right there.
Yeah.
That's really kind of small right now. I usually have it on the
Can you
end of
bring
my
that?
17 paper.
Can you
Yeah.
exit out of it and bring that up? It is,
Well. Where do I go? 'Cause I'm not
Oh, I
logged in
do
as
see it.
myself.
It is. Yeah. It's under administrative.
if you look on the second page of the detailed, in terms of legal expenses, you see, top line's total administrative services, legal expenses is below that. You see background checks, then you see general legal expenses, then you see the total legal expenses.
Do the bottom one, the other.
So I see, do I add up the 4,100, 4,800, 68? I add that up across to get to the 30,000?
Well, there's two, so there's one that's just the properties. And I figured that would probably be, that could be city related, that could be not city related. So we could do the same thing, as you can see, like down here. Yeah, so here, we do the same thing with consultants. We say consultants accounting, consultants IT, but what I can do is say, legal, which is our normal legal, which would be the eviction piece, and then the city's legal as well. Right, but you would have to add both. It just makes the document like this big, so I had to separate it.
I'll be quiet. Prior to this relationship, legal fees were out of control. They won't be, I know, with this relationship. In accounting for legal expenses, we finally got fired by our attorney, that the authority did, for a variety of reasons. I'm not certain all of them, and I'm not certain that payment was one of them, but it was an issue. And the way this is spread out, especially with the relationship, just for my money, it would be good to account for our legal expenses somewhere independently of how it's broken out or rolled up.
Yeah, we'll do that, because I think that's actually good information to have. So we'll break it down into, like we do at the city, so we'll have the 30,000 set up in terms of the LHA contribution, and then the remaining 40,000 we will set up as special counsel, and just do it that way so we can track it. That's how we do it. Good point. And we hope we're not having as many evictions.
Okay, so now we have the two vacant land properties that are in the process in various stages of getting development done. The Sweets land, Sunset land isn't a problem. No revenue coming in, no expenses. Overland, that's a problem, because we don't have revenue coming in, so LHCC has to pay from their fund balance to pay for if there's any landscaping that has to be done, which is usually just in the summer, the weeds are up and they have to have them mowed.
There's HOA fees too.
Yeah, that's, well, I was just going line by line, so that's the maintenance. And then in the general fund, they pay over almost $12,000 on HOA fees, that we don't even have people there. And then the financing mortgage, which is the $800,000 that was loaned to for overland from the city affordable housing fund. So we pay interest on that, and that's the $16,000 is just the interest.
So why do we have HOA fees with there is no one running?
The entire Hooper Crossing development is an HOA.
So whenever they did that deal, so when you look at the properties from the car wash over to Starbucks, down to, we don't pay them for the lodge in Hearthstone, we do. So to the lodge in Hearthstone, as part of that development, when they transferred the property, they had a commercial HOA. And so, yeah.
So the sooner we get something built, the better.
Yes.
So, and we're gonna cover both of those in the development update, cause we're making a lot of progress, so.
So, with this said, this is the budget we propose for 2023. We do send this off to all of the investors for all the properties. Sometimes they come back with changes. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't look at them at all. But some of them are very vigilant about looking and asking questions, which they're going to see increases across the board. So there could be some variance changes that they request, but I can report those out at the next meeting if that's what happens. But for the most part, it would just be, I think, like, for example, the suites investor, because we budgeted for damages every year, he wanted me to budget for damages, and I'm like, well, you don't really ever get paid for those. You know, we show it as revenue, but it just never ever comes in. So, that's, so, yeah.
Is this like former tenants are supposed to pay you for damages?
Well, this would be like a meth unit at the suites, yeah.
You can wait for that for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. So, those are the little things they might come back with. But. Anybody have any questions?
That is a lot of information, but I think it's amazing what you've done and where we're going. So we need to approve this 2023 property and agency budgets. And we can do this all in one swoop, can't we? Yeah. So can I have a motion?
Move approval.
Second. The moved by Commissioner Martin and second by Commissioner Zelda to approve and adopt the 2023 property and agency budgets. Any discussion? Commissioner Waters.
I do, thanks. So I appreciate the work as well. I know it's kind of work rolling a lot of detail, rolling up, and how you put it together is very explicit and helpful. I'm sitting here as we're going through this, I've got the 2022-2026 goals and objectives for LHA. And I'm trying to track, as we're going through this, what are the connections between this set of goals and objectives and this budget. And I can see some of them. The reason why for my question about vouchers, the 409, 11 waiting to be issued, comports with the 420 as a target. But let me make a couple of observations. One is, I don't think I ought to have to sit here doing that, right? This budget ought to be, presented. With all the work you've done a great job. However, to not have a specific connection between a set of goals and objectives and how a budget advances us towards achieving those seems to me to be a waste of the time and effort that went into these. And we finally, in my opinion, have a pretty good set of goals and objectives. We haven't looked at them. I don't know in Chiquita's orientation how this was presented. I hope, because there were 5 of us here who were part of adopting these, I hope when you were oriented, this was part of the package. And I've raised this question before. We haven't looked at these since we adopted them. And it would be easy, right, if we were approving this budget having gone through a review. The fact that we haven't gone through a review, and then I'm trying to cobble them together, is a little disappointing that I've got to do it that way. So I'm going to vote for the budget, but I don't think any member of this board ought to have to sit here and do it that way a year from now as we're adopting the budget. These ought to be in front of us often enough. We know where we are, what the plan of work for, I don't know what our targets are for 2023, right? That are tied specifically to these goals and objectives, and there should be some. So in terms of performance targets, accountability, measuring progress, reasons to celebrate, as the chairwoman said, there's lots of good work that's been done. I don't want to detract from that. I'm just saying, I think it's necessary, but it's not sufficient as a corporate board to not have this budget and a performance plan for 2000 and targets going forward, so we can measure progress a year from now and what that budget will look like based on that progress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm gonna vote for the budget. I gotta say, I think we're missing a huge opportunity. I think we all share responsibility for this, and I think the staff has to own this just like we should own it. End of comment.
Good comment. So, starting now with this budget, would it be possible to come back and tell us how it ties in going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could present something at the next meeting.
That would
Not a
Yeah.
problem.
I think that,
I mean, I did budget for like exceptional increases, you know, for exceptional pay and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's stuff that's in the background that you just think.
Well, there's so
and I
much of the
totally-
work that you've done
Yeah.
that I can see. I mean, it's like the development target, right? What you presented a couple of meetings ago
right,
comports with exactly what we laid out here.
yeah,
It would be good to have tied that presentation to that goal.
Right.
But there are some others here that are not quite as obvious in terms of what our target, what are we trying to accomplish? Rental rates and, you know, a balanced budget and all that in quality of resident life. And I know there's a lot of activities going on, but it's out there and it's
Right.
not tied here specific, and we don't have performance targets. Measurement is impossible with that approach, and accountability is non-existent, right? At least in terms of the things that we said are important and how we're gonna measure our progress.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think it is the one surefire way of knowing when to celebrate. You know, you're probably giving each other high fives every day because of the good work that's going on. But one way to be sure is like, we know we got it, you know?
yeah.
So let's celebrate for 5 minutes and then get back to work. But that's part of the value of this.
So if I may, we adopted those goals they were in progress for several months, and then we adopted them early March of this year. So I think at our next meeting, which is January 31st, that's almost a year. And then going forward, we can tie it to the budget. But maybe January 31st would be good. We can tie it to the budget and generally do an update on what we've accomplished in 2022 and what is on target for 23.
However, I do have to say that in each property, I saw goals and targets for every single property that we addressed tonight. So,
Yeah, I think we need to be more explicit.
yeah, I do think
Yeah.
we do have targets and goals, and I saw them in each property as you presented it with the reserves, with the different accounts for meth, and where you wanted to be with each property. So I do see targets and goals here.
I think part of it is, you know, the one that was probably the most prominent is tenant services. And you can see where we hit some of them, but we couldn't hit others just because of the financial constraints.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll come back and give that to you all.
Okay. Are there any other comments? All right, let's vote on approving this budget. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. So now we have some resolutions that we need to go through. Are you going to present on these?
Yes, briefly.
So, go ahead.
So the first one you have in your packet for item 5B, this is the approval of the fair market, the revising the payment standard schedule to match fair market rents for the HCB program. So we've already given in kind of the intro on why that is needed. Really it's trying to make our vouchers more usable in our area. And we coordinated with Boulder County Housing Authority and Boulder Housing Partners, and everybody is agreed to go up to 105% this year with your approval. 105% of the market. So in 2022, we were operating at 100% of fair market rent. So this would be a 5% increase to try and help those voucher holders that are out there looking.
Okay, so this is LHA 2022-15 resolution. Let's vote on, okay, thank you. I was going to say we're going to vote on each one of them as they're presented. So Commissioner Waters made the motion to approve, and did you, Commissioner Yarville seconded. Is there any discussion on this? Yeah. Commissioner Martin.
You said you chose to go to 105%. What's the downside of going to 110%? Presumably they would be able to find more places at 110%. Is that because we're making up the difference?
We had to look at our budget, so we had to take the number of vouchers and the amount of funds we get, and can we sustain the 105%, and that's what each agency was able to sustain. So that's why we can't go up to 110. If HUD was to give us more money, then we all probably could come back to the table and say, let's go to 110, but it's all three agencies. We try to keep it the same because we fund people in Boulder County, they fund people in Boulder County, so
what avenues do we have to try to persuade the national agencies that are funding this that their definition of market rate is inconsistent with the rents that are charged here? that there's a market. Do we try? Do we tug on sleeves? I mean, there must be.
it's HUD.
It's HUD.
It's HUD.
So similar, they set the incomes. We do not have flexibility there. In most instances, there's just not a lot of flexibility.
We don't know what their methodology is for making these. I mean, they must study something.
Yeah, so
I don't know that
they'll say that, you know, they look at the income data from that, I mean, because they do it by counties, correct? And so they'll say that they review the income data that they have coming in through various sources. They'll look at the rental data coming in from various sources, and here's your number. The challenge with it is it's nationwide, and so they use the same process. And so yeah, they're highly unlikely to change it. I think, to answer your question, how do we get more money? I think it goes into all the audits and everything that we've been going through and showing better performance, which then lets us get more funding for the vouchers.
But if our people that we award vouchers to can't find a place to live, our performance isn't going to improve.
So this is an incremental step in that, and also creating our partnerships to try and get landlords more willing to rent to voucher holders. Yeah, you hit it at all angles to try and improve the performance. I would also say that just the nature of HUD, just like the incomes that they put out, it's never going to be totally true to today, because they are using data the best that they can up to a certain point, but then that fair market rent is set for a year, and what have we seen in our housing market in the last 3 months that change? No, people that are out there looking on right now are not necessarily operating under the same data that the HUD is.
Well, the number lags, and so you take right now we're at an interesting point. So historically, in the housing market, when you see, again, it's what are normal interest rates and what are high interest rates. You know, I think my first house that I bought was like 9 or 10%, which is lower than some folks and what they bought. So we've gone from a 2%, 3% interest environment to now a 6% interest environment. And when you see, there's some interesting articles on this, and so what happens is when you see that interest rise on home loans, you tend to see more people moving into rental units because they can't get qualified for the home loans, which then is rapidly increasing the cost of rental units because there's actually more competition for it. And the HUD number lags. So then that creates part of the problem.
Okay, is there any more discussion? Seeing none, let's vote on LHA 2022-15. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? So that passes unanimously. Let's go to LHA 2022-16, approval of acceptance of funds.
So I'm gonna present the next three resolutions together, because they're all very similar. 2022-15, 16, and 17. So this is a set of three grants that is coming from the city's CDBG program to the LHA for the Aspen Meadows neighborhood playground replacement, the Hover Crossing properties, parking lot and accessibility improvements project, and the security cameras project at various LHA properties, the ones that don't already have them, to fill out to make sure every property has it. So City Council, back in June, approved the CDBG action plan, which these were listed and described there. So you'd be considering tonight accepting that grant fund and allowing us to execute the work. City Council is going to consider that on November 15th for the same. So
That's it. So we'll pass these in a slate, we might as well. So can I have a motion to pass LHA 2022-16, LHA 2022-17, and LHA 2022-18?
thank you for correcting those numbers. I was looking at my old voucher resolution in front of me that was number 15, so sorry about that.
Okay, so it's been moved by Commissioner Wong, seconded by Commissioner Hidalgo-Ferring. Is there any discussion on these?
Just to clarify, so we're gonna approve tonight, LHA is gonna approve receiving
Yes.
the CDD grants, and we're gonna approve awarding them.
Right.
Moving that money on the 15th.
Ideally,
Yeah.
we'd have it swapped, but
I got it.
schedule.
No worries.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you for all that work. Now, interim executive director's report.
So a few things, and then we'll go into those specific items that we put on the schedule to report to you all. I think one of the things that we've been working with recently is there is definitely more interest in people partnering with the Housing Authority today than what we've seen before. And, you know, we kind of talked about this, and Commissioner Waters made the comment, it's like Shark Tank.
Yeah.
And we're really hitting that point where it is like Shark Tank in terms of, so in the last 2 weeks, we've had somebody talk to us about you all have some policies in terms of some tax exemptions that properties can get. So one group was looking for it. What does that mean? I think that would result in approximately $130,000 in that tax exemption that would come into the Housing Authority. That's a little more straightforward. We've had a developer approach us that has a property fairly far into the development process that is starting to look at LIHTCs. And so when you look at LIHTCs, that's really where we can step in from the Housing Authority perspective. We talked about all the budget issues and what we need in the general fund. And so, you know, in the meeting that we had last week, you know, we said, here's our interest. We're gonna want management of the facility and or development fees depending on how the deal is structured. And so that is part of building the ongoing revenue stream into the LHA general fund to manage that gap. Same conversation was on a different parcel of the property in terms of how do you see this working? How does it work with LIHTCs? How does it work, you know, just generally in terms of rental housing? So we know one is right. And so they're gonna go back and do some homework and really look at it. We're pretty focused on they need to have a really good LIHTC group with them because we don't want to go into a situation like this with someone who doesn't understand it because it is incredibly complicated. So those are two opportunities. So those are three opportunities that has presented themselves. in terms of the over property where we talked about what we were paying, we just finished going through an interview process where we put out an RFP for the development of that. We talked about modular building, we talked about what we can look at. We had some amazing groups submit in that process, which, to be frank, I don't know if we would have seen that quality of applicants a year ago.
We had nine submittals, interviewed four that were high, they were all great.
And so we're working through that. We have to finish going through the selection process. We've learned some interesting things in that. You know, we went to visit Indiewell, and we were very intentional about that modular construction. What we learned is that's probably a little farther ahead than the tax credit world, because of the capital outlay and the fact that you have to dump so much money up front in that the investment groups in that tax credit world are exploring it, but reluctant just because of the capital outlay on that. We learned about some other modular building techniques that can accomplish something very similar. So there's going to be a lot of options that we're going to have at our disposal. And so hopefully within a week we will finish that process, announce it, and then we're very quickly going to move into the work of meeting with that group and start the process of what we want in that location. What's really interesting, and this is how it kind of touches the other side of the organization, and I think this is really where the utility of this partnership comes into play, is it went to, well, what if we looked at podium construction? And podium construction is what you saw at 150 Main, where you have an elevated lower level and then you have units above it. That gives you the ability to get your density that you need on the structure. And then on the basis, you can condo the area underneath, and that opens up the doors to things like childcare. That opens up the doors to things like a library annex, a commercial space that helps build bridge the financial gap. So, you know, we'll start that work once we announce it, and we began to work with them on it. And so I was really pleased. I don't know about Molly, but it was, I mean, we were blown away by the folks that stepped into this and the work that they've done. So in probably a couple of weeks, we're going to start on the beginning of that development of that property.
So what is so cool about it is, well, first of all, it started morphing. We had this idea, but we wanted to get the developers' ideas, and by the end of the 4 interviews, we're looking at a family hub, is what it really seems like. We want to serve, get larger sized units, which is difficult under LHAAB, 3 and 4 bedrooms, difficult under LHAAB, but if you come in with either library or early child care space or other similar things, those are count as amenity space. And then the tax credits end up funding a part of that, and it allows you have the extra source to even do the 3 to 4 bedrooms. So it's really just taking shape, and it's
Very interesting.
And that's where NDC and the contract we have with them as a city, they'll come in and slide beside us and help us maneuver through the tax credit world. And so, you know, that's an update. Obviously, in the last meeting, we updated you on where we sit with Zinnia now. And I think they've gone through their second review. We think we're pretty good. So probably before the next meeting, we're going to be moving into the closing process on that property.
so we'll transfer the property by the end of the year.
Correct.
And then we'll be, the closing on the financing is scheduled for May, but from January to May, it'll be very much in.
We'll transfer the property, and so then I think we're looking at starting the construction in May, June.
Remind us where that property is.
It's adjacent to the suites.
Oh, that one, okay.
And so, Molly
The
can,
flower field.
Molly, yeah,
Yes.
the name.
Sunset to Bluebird to Zinnia.
Oh,
Sunset
So
Bluebird.
Zinnia now is the code name for the project.
Zinnia is the
Is
official
is
name
the
of the
official name.
project.
Thank you.
So part of it was, a lot of us are incredibly bad with names. I think we said, well, there's a lot of native flowers to Colorado, so looking at it as a campus-wide project, and because there's another, in that land transfer, remember, this is just stage one. There's another property that's there, and then we have some other areas that we're looking at building. I think learning from the Hover, we may want to reset kind of what we're thinking about in that multifaceted housing approach, that Hover property. So yeah, in March I'll go. Molly, I'll have, so we talked to you all about approaching a conversation with Recovery Cafe. And that is because we needed more supportive services in that area, specifically on the recovery side and what we're seeing. And so Molly's just been knee deep into that one with them. That one's complicated because it involves the tax investors, the ground lease, connecting to the building, and I think we're at a point where we're taking the next step with architects.
Yeah. So in order to attach it to the suites, which makes it eligible for CDBG funds, which we have CDBG CV, so COVID funds that have been challenging to spend down before we hit an expenditure deadline coming up. So on November 29th, City Council will be considering moving some of those CDBG funds around to fund the Recovery Cafe, because that's perfect use of those funds in terms of that eligibility. But that means we have to attach it to the suites, which means we are talking about, that is a property owned by an entity that the equity investor is involved in. So we have to get all these approvals, and it's difficult. However, if we can make it work, then we would have the services on site. They would have a street presence, which is exactly what they want, like a storefront style. And also, they wouldn't have to go out and find land or a building to purchase, which means they can put more of the funding that they're getting to the actual facility. So it's hard, it's not easy, it's not the easy route, but if we can swing it, it's really worth it. So we're really working for that. So just yesterday, we worked with Recovery Cafe to craft an RFP for feasibility and architecture, and that should have an award there in the end of November. So that'll help us figure out really what to do feasibility wise.
So why is this important, and why is this important in this location? Can you bring that up? So we're going to show you some pictures. Make sure that the ones with non-residents is in that one.
No.
Okay.
Elements is still our development partner
They
on
are.
Zinnia.
On Zinnia, correct.
Not necessarily on
No.
this project.
Now, we thought about attaching it, but we were too far down, so we just, so Lisa this week, and we kind of talked about what's creating the workload. They moved up some evictions on her, so we're gonna kind of show you this, go back to that one, so, is there a way to change it to?
Is it upside down?
I think it's upside down. Can you rotate that? Yeah, there we go. So if you can kind of see this, what you're seeing on it is basically drug paraphernalia. So this was an eviction that we went through. How long have they been in the unit?
This one's 4 months.
So
But these pictures are from today.
From today.
these pictures are from today, but the person was in the unit, they've only been in there 4 months.
This is in the suites?
This is in the suites. So you see the drug paraphernalia there, go to the next one. Now you're gonna have to flip it again. So again, you see more drug.
Firearm?
Those are BB guns.
We all
So,
said the same thing.
yeah, those are BB guns. So, you can see more drug paraphernalia. You can see drug paraphernalia there. You can see the meth that is here in this location. And so Lisa showed me these, and we've talked about the evictions, but we haven't necessarily shown you, what they deal with when they're in this, but also I think it's the importance of really bringing that recovery component into that location because we have a lot of people that are being successful. We have some that have been successful that because of the nature of people who are around there that they've relapsed. And so having that presence from a recovery standpoint in a facility like this, I think is incredibly important. And you know, what I've said to Molly is, what's the value in this? The value is you avoid 2 meth contaminated units and your ROI is back. I mean, it's a pretty simple mathematical equation. And so we think that's really important on this. As a side note, Molly went to Denver to look at tour property, of which when we get more information, we're gonna talk to you all about what Denver has done. It is really cool. But they found that the meth detectors are now being marketed and sold. And so, yeah. But so Molly's gonna communicate with them and try to get the folks from New Zealand to try to come in and talk to folks about this. And so we know now that they are marketing it. And I've sent some other things to them. So it's interesting that New Zealand's kind of leading the pack right now in this work. So hopefully in the near future we will have more information on that.
If this is a 4-month tenant, and we've got money budgeted for background checks for each of our properties, what did we miss here? What are we checking?
Well, we're doing the background checks, the things that are coming up, because they plead them down in court, so we only get to see what it's pled down to. And if it's not something that HUD allows us to deny for, we have to allow them in. And we can only deny if they manufacture in public housing.
So they can manufacture in the old house that they lost to foreclosure, and they can be convicted of that, and you can't deny for it.
Correct, and depending on how it's reported through the court system.
So cooking meth is a reason to be excluded. Contaminating through the use of meth is not.
And even if you're cooking meth and you get evicted, but the eviction is for
non-payment of rent, something else.
Suppressed, that does not show up on the record.
So I've asked, and I'll be honest, as I've talked to landlords, I've been pretty overt to say, when you have these issues, and I think this is why we're being so dogged on it, on the eviction, is if we're not dogged on this case, saying what the issues are, and it's non-payment, we're just setting someone else up for the same issue. And Lisa has been talking to the apartment association about how do we collectively start getting focused and on the same page where when this comes up, we're dealing with it, because otherwise she's an apartment owner and I don't deal with it, just set her up for the same issue, because we're all under the same fair housing laws. And so that's the piece of following through the evictions and getting through and buttoning this up from a legal perspective, because while they can't be prohibited for using, the eviction is a different
Yeah, we can
tool.
not allow them for eviction. And if they owe another landlord a substantial amount of money, so this is where our collection piece that Kendra's been really working on, as these meth units are coming up and we're notating it and we're sending it over to collection, then it's going on their credit report, and so as a landlord.
Not what I found out. So what I found out is collections is a whole new ballgame now, and you cannot, and collection agencies will not accept anything that's a fee or a fine. So if we're giving fines or fees for meth, for cleaning and all of that, you can't do anything about it. It doesn't ever go to collection. You can go to collections, but it will never get on their credit report. So it doesn't secure anybody that's gonna get this person X. Unless there's a judgment, and then you have to act on that judgment. But the judgments usually are determined based on amount.
And those decisions get made, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Our own city mediation is working then against us because they're gonna like buy down, you know, well, all right, we'll, if you get out by this certain date, we're not gonna put an eviction on your record. I mean, so what we're doing is throwing hand grenades at potential landlords by putting certain people out on the street. And if they become unrentable to, then they have no option but to freeze and die on the streets. So we don't have a way to salvage these people at all. That's what it comes to.
Well, I think the answer is and we're seeing some groups do this. We talked to the Salvation Army. I think as you look at, and I'm gonna call it transitional housing. Not transitional housing, not permanent supportive housing, but a transitional housing component where how do you normalize? Because it's the normalizing that's getting lost in this.
So you use transitional for two different categories just then?
Yeah, I said, I'm gonna call, so what happens is, and what we see really predominantly at the suites is, we see people that are moved into permanent supportive housing that are not ready for permanent supportive housing. Mm-hmm. And when, you know, the mayor and I had a conversation with Salvation Army, you know, Molly talked to folks at this other facility, what we're finding is there's actually a step before that. And the step is, and I'm using the word transitional housing, what they do is, whether it's what the Salvation Army's doing in Denver with pallet homes, whether it's what they're doing at this other facility, is they're moving folks into what I would say is a quasi-housing environment. And they're re-engaging into some pretty basic behaviors. When to wash your clothes, when to take showers, because so much of that has been lost over time. And so they are normalizing individuals via that process. And then they're moving them into permanent supportive housing, and they tend to be more successful versus just saying, this is the life I've been in, I'm moving you into permanent supportive housing, and so many people don't stop it. I mean, it's like the stories that you hear where, one story we heard, they put a guy into housing and he had to sleep in his tent in his living room for a couple of months because he was not ready for that transition. And so those are some things we're starting to look in, and the mayor's throwing a lot of stuff to us that she's heard about that is really starting to reshift my mind. But to your point in terms of this, that is why as a landlord, you listen to, we've been on the other side of mediation, and we're like, no, this behavior is so egregious, so disruptive, we can't do this. And then at times in other legal cases, we reserved our right. And the one where we had the huge meth level, we reserved our right, and we did go back to the court to say, we want a judgment on this. So now that it's a judgment, they can put it into, now we have to act on it, we get it into collections, and then that goes on the record.
And that person can't get a lease anywhere.
More than likely.
So going back to this, and the reason for Recovery Cafe is that once they transition to supportive housing, they need a support system there. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have the support system, it's too easy to go back to old habits. So it is a continuation, and it helps LHA because we hopefully then will be ahead of any issues that would come up with the tenants. They have somebody on site to go to that is helping with therapy sessions on a weekly basis or whatever that is. Because otherwise, for me, the cost of not having this and continually having meth problems in our units, we can't get ahead of it.
And period. If you're a private landlord, we heard it from Mr. Sandoval,
Yes.
you can't find insurance for meth remediation. The only reason we're able to still be insured is because we're in an insurance portfolio that is solely for housing authorities. At what point does that loss ratio shift so much that they stop doing it? Because then we can't afford it.
Right.
I mean, you've seen the budget. And then what you're doing is you're penalizing those people who aren't doing that, who are willing to do what they need to be housed, and then they're losing their housing because you can't afford to continue to remediate units. It's a tough cycle.
It is.
So who are the decision makers that inform collection agencies what they can or cannot include on a record? The cycles that you just described, Harold, are those, is that Congress? Is that agency leadership without accountability? I mean, where are those decisions being made to put us in a position, and housing authorities everywhere, potentially to put folks who are following all the rules, right, who are so dependent upon this housing and doing it the right way, at risk because of folks who don't follow any of the rules and are, abusing every norm that we would expect residents to abide by?
I can definitely ask PC Services, it's the same collection agency. She made it sound like it was the credit agencies, but there may be laws attached to that.
Exactly.
That have driven where they say, we can't do fines, we can't do fees. And then they'll collect as far as they can, but then what they do is they do this, the collection agencies do this formula. And they have to do a formula if it can even move to the next step for litigation. And for our properties, it would never make it because they have to see that that person can pay before it moves to the next step. So if we have low-income housing, a lot of the times those people aren't gonna show that they can actually pay it. If they can, then it goes to litigation. They pay all the lawyer fees, but then when they get the money, it automatically pays their lawyer fees first, but then it could go to collections if we can get it to there. But
before we find ourselves in a place where we're kicked out of an insurance pool or collaborative, is it CML? Is it NCL? I mean, there's got to be some place that these issues can be addressed with whoever the decision makers are.
And I think that's a piece where we need to start getting ourselves into some of these housing authority conferences, because I don't know that it'll be NLC or CML, or it'll be housing authority specific. And so we're gonna have to, but we'll dig that up, because.
So it's sort of off topic, except I guess we're looking at getting into it, but what they're doing in Denver this is like CVC, I guess, Colorado Village Collaborative. They're the pallet homes people. But the question is, what do they do that's different from the suites? It's one thing to teach people how to cook, how to take a shower, how to wash your clothes. But if you keep cooking meth, it doesn't matter whether you're clean or dirty, you're keeping to cook meth.
Can I, that is the point of the tour. I think finding out that information and bringing it back.
So what
we can't answer that at this point.
What we learned when we talked to the Salvation Army, zero tolerance. I mean, so it's like think of the VCP model, where VCP does this. And it's where you can come in, you can have a place, you can do this. You don't follow the rules, zero tolerance.
How do they find out you didn't? How did this guy get in with all that
Well,
stuff?
so it's a little bit different in that they have inspections and everything else, and they have a process. And so I think we're gonna get some tours set up for you all to kind of go through and look at it, but it's a different standard than permanent supportive housing, because that's, once you cross into housing,
You have rights.
you have all these rules. And they're on the front end of that, and so that's where we're gonna get some of these tours set up for you all. But that's consistent. I mean, I've heard it now from VCP, I've heard it from the Salvation Army, is that they have pretty hard and fast standards. And if you don't follow those standards, then you're not allowed to stay there. And so those that are following those standards then do tend to be really, really successful.
I just think that this person right here, who's only been in this unit for 4 months, already knew what they were doing.
Of course.
And
You know.
they started causing trouble right
As
off
soon
the
as
bat.
they got in there,
Mhm.
right, and they already did their research, they already know what they can and what they can't do. They already know once they get in, they can't get kicked out unless they get found.
Yep.
And so, so it's really, really, background checks only do so much, you know, as far as behaviors. And, yeah, it's the people like that who already know how to, you know, yeah, get in the system and work the system and do what they need to do. But the people who've been in housing for 10 years and start hanging around the wrong people, those are the ones who slowly end up getting in trouble. But this person already knew what they were doing.
Which is why I think that the Recovery Cafe is such a good idea, to get eyes in the situation, we know how to deal with it.
Or support for the individuals that are tempted, that have an
Yes.
avenue
Yes.
to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And, so,
It's all good.
that's I think we've got some, the other points we wanna talk about.
You have your occupancy report and property updates.
So attached was, the end of September's occupancy reports. We did have a decline in occupancy and we did drop to 92%. Part of this is, about a third of our vacant units are down units. On the bottom, midway through the page, you will see our meth contamination units. 2 of those have now, one is almost back on the market, Summer 110 up this week, which has been down over a year. That one has been completely restored by our reconstruction company, but now we have to go in and do the final maintenance, get it all ready, clean it, get it completely ready for occupancy, get it furnished, because the suites we do furnish the units, and trying to get beds right now. We cannot get an affordable bed. I need 12 beds for the suites, and trying to find a company that can get us a bed at less than 500 is not possible. So that's one of the struggles we're running in there. Let's see.
What are your bed costs? What are they coming in?
I think Diana said she had some at 700, 900. And right now we know we need about 12 beds for the suites. So we're
Is it just a mattress or?
mattress, box springs, and frame. We're set on couches, dressers. We still have a supply of those from when the suites was originally, I guess, got bought. We have brand new, everything else but beds, we don't.
So when you have a meth unit, it all gets trashed.
Even the next leg box.
Can you use the laugh? Okay, that's sad.
Everything goes. Some of the counters, the mantles in the suite, some of them have fireplaces and they have a mantle, depending on what it's made out of, has to go. If it's a porous surface, it has to be ripped out. So some of these units are pretty sad when they're done. Let's see.
Go ahead.
Aspen Senior, we still have a meth unit there. We thought that was gonna be a simple clean, but when they went back to do the retesting, the levels were still high, so that required the kitchen cabinets coming out, and this unit was just redone last year. Half the flooring had to come out from the bathroom and the hallway, the cabinets had to come out, everything in the bathroom basically had to come out.
I just can't get my mind wrapped around residents at Aspen Meadows destroying a unit through the use of meth.
Within a year.
That's the Fall River one that we have currently, that's a meth unit. That was an eviction hoarding situation, pack out, highest levels, second highest level the test company has ever seen in Boulder County.
Well, front range.
Front range. Yes, so,
Front range.
Oh, wow.
yeah, we're in the 2000s. Most of ours come in between Light cleaning would be anything from 0.6 to maybe 1, 2. Yeah. A lot of our suites units are in the hundreds. This one at Fall River the bedroom I believe was 2,000. The bathroom was 1,000.
Why wasn't the person dead?
Don't know. So on that one, we incurred even additional costs because on some of these, we have to test the neighboring units, people across the hall, down the hall. So all that adds up the cleaning costs.
I don't think we've had a property, the village place has.
And the Hearthstone, pretty much.
Yeah, okay.
When can we get those, Smith?
That's why we're trying to do it, because they're expensive, they're like $500 or $600.
They're $600
But-
each. It's an alarm, like
Like a smoke alarm.
outside.
But if you catch it early enough, then it's a cleaning versus what we're talking about. But even then, I mean, $600 a pop, you avoid one unit.
Yeah.
And they pay for
And then they pay
themselves.
for themselves. So anyway. The other problem on the waiting list is, especially in our age-restricted units, we've talked to you about this before, is we're just not seeing people that can come in and take the units. They're either not ready, they're not out of their lease, and so we're gonna dig into a little more to understand what's happening in that sector, because it's definitely changed, and it changed pretty fast on us. And I don't think it's unique to us. I think it's something that everyone's starting to see in age-restricted units.
Yeah, so currently we do have 3 waiting lists open. Fall River, Aspen Meadow Senior, and Village Place all have wait list opening, and everybody who's applying for the wait list are not looking to move for 6 months to a year.
Oh.
And so as Diane and I are getting calls, we are, sending them straight to these properties and saying, they have availability, they can accommodate you today as long as you meet the background and credit criterion. So we're trying, but it's an uphill battle most days. We have had a few move-ins though this past month, and working on a couple more. This report does show the Hearthstone having 2 vacants. They are fully rented right now, so they are back at 100% occupied. And 2 of the meth units have, like I said, have come off. F3 at Aspen Neighborhood, that one's been down for quite a while, a little over a year. That's now the manager's unit. She has moved in and she is living there at the neighborhood. We added a new one at the neighborhood, B2. That one will probably be full gut as well and rebuild. And the one today we anticipate being a full gut as well. We had a few other units that are down for a while. Fall River, we had a biohazard. We're still waiting on replacement flooring. They can't get the flooring, so it's either replace the whole unit or find that flooring. And A4, which was another bad one over at the neighborhood, that one's now is reoccupied though. And then the suites, we had a biohazard cleanup, and we're waiting. They're testing the flooring to see if the seeped into the flooring and if it can be cleaned or need to be replaced.
Hey, just real quick on that one, on the flooring, run what the full replacement will be.
Okay.
And then that way we can look at what the cost differential is in terms of rental time. Because it may be better financially just to
Replace. And then the next report was the unit vacancy report. So you can kind of see how long some of these units have been vacant, who we've called, that we've had people underqualify, overqualify. We've had 1 unit at Spring Creek that we've had 2 rentals. They've been fully approved and then they backed out because the neighbors let them know that was a previous meth unit.
Oh.
So it's just a struggle. So this report I will include every quarter going forward, so you can kind of just see the longevity of the vacancies and why they've haven't been rented or the struggles we're seeing with those units. And to quickly touch on the property updates, the quarterly management walks I had started last quarter. I'm walking each property top to bottom every quarter, and this led into many of the things that I submitted to Kendra for budget needs. Some of them will be taken in care of in 2022, and the other ones are budgeting out for 2023. And this is anything from landscaping improvements, patio furniture that's failing, that needed replaced for years, but never kind of always had to look over. So we are each quarter going out to the properties, I'm putting my eyes on it, I'm following up with the maintenance staff, seeing where things are, what needs to be done next, and just making sure they're following through and everybody's being held accountable and that we're getting these things accomplished.
So when Lisa says top to bottom, she's not joking. She's literally on the roof, from the roof to the landscaping.
So, trying to make sure we have it all covered. What? Oh, no, oh, no. Another thing, like Adeline pointed out, the VIA started today. I'm excited for that. I know the residents were really excited. 2 weeks ago, we rushed through and had VIA go out to all the properties with about a 48-hour notice and had a great turnout at all the properties of residents who may have not been ready to start taking transportation, but they know as the winter months come that they need to transition to somebody else driving for them. So that was a lot of the feedback we heard at those meetings, and so very excited. Some of the property things we have been doing, in October we had Boulder County Health Department come in. They did COVID vaccinations and the flu shots for the seniors. Our last one is scheduled for Friday at the suites. They will be coming in and providing to any resident who wants it free of charge. We also did Resident Photo Day, which I can't wait to show you guys some of these photos. We have some photographers on our staff, and we got the backdrops and literally held picture day like when they were in school. And the resident excitement for these, they're bringing their dogs with them, posing. They're like, some of them were like, oh, this is going to be my Christmas card. This is what I'm giving out. And we're hoping to start doing this actually almost twice a year now because of just the excitement from the residents and made them feel very young for the day. They got to get all dolled up, do their hair, their makeup. They invited like family members to come pose with them as well. So it was very fun. Big hit.
Well, when you hire people that know the world and do a good job, I mean, this is something that Lisa and her staff came up with. And I think that's when you kind of tie back to your question of what was the issue. The issue is really getting folks like this that take that interest and do it.
And my team's been amazing. I was all set to help out with these, and then I had an unexpected death in the family, and my team 100% jumped in and covered every spot, executed, edited the photos, got them to me. So very proud of my team for that. Couple of just property updates. I'm not going to go through all of these. The suites had MHEG come out. That's their investor. They did a top to bottom walk as well, and they were very happy with the condition of the property. They were happy with the resident feedback they got when they were on site. The calls for service there have remained low over the last few weeks, so excited about that. And CHAFA came out and did an audit. They did files and a video tour of the property. Only thing they had was a couple minor findings that we had fixed within 48 hours, so no findings went reported. Aspen Meadows had the same day a CHAFA audit, same thing, no, only minor findings, everything's been corrected. Their investor also did an audit. We're still pending those results on that one. And Palace Construction did come out and fix some of the items that we had from the renovation that were failing. We noticed the dumpster, the beams around the dumpster that were supposed to be pure cedar were cracked and failing, so we knew something was wrong. They've already replaced all those with the right material. They got the manufacturer for the outdoor benches and tables that were on their second floor. They were all warped, and the manufacturer is replacing all those and bringing them, I believe, Friday. They've repainted anywhere that brick was chipping, so they're holding up their warranty even though we're just past the warranty period. They're making sure everything is corrected. Village Place, we had a great coffee and conversations with Harold. I know they're very anxious for the re-syndication, and I know we're meeting later this week to go over the next steps and what the resident surveys are going to look like and getting them tours of Aspen Meadow so that they can see kind of what it's going to look like or some of the options that will be going on. And that's the most of it.
So, I'm going to end with some good news. I was strategic in doing this.
If you're going to end on good news, I'm going to make one more observation. I don't mean it to be bad news, but I am going to take it back to our goals and objectives. If I'm just listening to this conversation, I might wonder, we have as a target here we've stated preserving up to 200 existing affordable housing units and then 6 new developments. One might wonder why we're interested in more units if at a 92% occupancy rate and struggling to fill some of those units. Yeah. But the overall goal is that we would do an assessment to look at housing types, demographics of a population to determine what the demand is going to become. I'm guessing we haven't done that, or we would have seen the results of that. But look, if I go back to this, had we done that, we now could talk about housing types and the type of, and the demographics of a population that we're trying to build out, right, to satisfy or that needs to meet. And I don't know how to connect those dots as I'm sitting here. I'm listening to the struggles to get, things filled for predictable reasons that, I understand. If we don't tie it back to this and then make adjustments, I'm not certain why we do this.
So we got the grant from DOLA, and when we put the grant out the first time for an RFP, we didn't have any responses. We put it out the second time, we have had responses, and that work is actually underway right now.
About to sign the contract.
Which will then be the basis for this.
You get my point?
Yeah.
Yeah. That all of this, the context for all of it should be grounded, I think, back in this set of goals and objectives that we set. And then we can adjust, and whatever performance targets we need to set this next year, whether it's occupancy rates, numbers of units, types of units, the demographics that we're trying to accommodate. So.
Yeah, and so, when we look at these other projects and why, we're focusing on family units because we know that is the gap that we're seeing in the community. And so we're not looking at more age-restricted units because of these issues, but that work will then inform into more of the ongoing basis for it. But yeah, that was a product of the world. Good news on this is, so you've heard audit. That's probably been the last 6 months of the work that has really been undertaken by the staff in terms of, and when we talk about staff capacity and what they're able to do, you have HUD audits, you have investor audits, you have DOLA audits, you have CHAFA audits, and so obviously, just because of the nature of what the condition when we took it over, it seems like an audit every month.
Every week, more like multiple every week.
Yeah, and so that's really what's been eating up staff time. Because those audits are insane. So you have to go through and you have to inspect all the units, make sure nothing's wrong, and then cross your fingers that people don't change what you've inspected. Remove smoke detectors, do things like that, because that happens. So we have to document it. So even before the audit, there's a massive amount of work that they have to go through, review files, make sure the files are in order, because you never know what they're going to pick. You have to go through, inspect the property, inspect the units, and then they will remove smoke detectors. But then because we have it documented that the smoke detector was connected and it was removed, then they can attribute that to then the resident, and it's a little bit different.
So why aren't smoke detectors installed in a tamper-proof way? It sounds like you're talking about the same smoke detectors that was on the ceiling of my tract house when I moved in.
It's the way it's built.
Why?
I don't know, we weren't here. I mean, that's the
Okay.
thing. I mean, obviously you don't want to do that. And that was only one case, but it could be light bulbs, you name it. We had our biggest audit last week, and that was the MOR audit, which is an audit for the lodge, and the Hearthstone, which is a HUD audit that, in terms of what they had to do to get ready for that, was more significant than anything they had to do. That was the same audit that we got in 2021, right before we took over, or right as we were transitioning into it. And so Molly and I got to meet with the auditor, and we're still waiting on the results, but he kind of sobered us when he said, I think we only scored like a 20 out of 100 in 2001 based on where 2021 based on where they were at that time. And the only reason that they probably, the only reason they got any points at all was because of the condition of the facility. They basically got no points for anything else in those facilities.
Including
Anything
our
else
tenant
you-
files and
Tenant
policies,
files,
finances,
unit
and everything.
condition, all of those issues. And so it was probably as bad a fail as you can imagine. We did the debrief with him, and he said it was dramatically different. A 180 in terms of what they had to deal with. He said, I no longer have to guess where the funding's going to because the funding is really completely outlined for us. Apparently, we didn't know that when they were asking for certain financial statements before, historically, that the staff at the time would say, we can't give it to you, or the board won't allow us to give it to you. And, yeah. Yeah, yes. And which is bizarre to me because it's an open record.
Right.
And so he basically said, I never have to guess where anything is, I know where it is. So the condition's awesome. We think that worst case scenario, we're gonna get a satisfactory.
Just to show the
We think
progress over
it
time.
could be a little bit higher than that, and I think it's impossible to move as far as we hope to do. But he's gonna give us what they judge the units on, so that we can start using that to set the standards in terms of where we wanna be and what, to the point of objectives, or what are the objectives for Lisa and the managers, what are the objectives of the operation and or the maintenance staff, because that really is the bar that we need to try to hit in order to get that. But and then at the end we said, well, we're fighting with HUD on some other issues. Tell us about your perception of the city taking over this. And his comment was, I hope the city never gets away from this based on the difference. And so we're hoping that it comes back, at least it's satisfactory, but preliminary review was night and day difference between what was there before and what's there now.
So to put a number on it, is a satisfactory a 60, a 75, because you had a 20 before.
70. So
70s.
it's fail,
Yeah.
below average, or I'm messing up the categories. Something like below average, satisfactory, above average, exceptional. He said, don't expect to go from where we were to exceptional in 1 year, but that could be a thing over time. But we are expecting a satisfactory, which is a very good thing for 1 year's worth in progress.
So you basically have a baseline now for yourself, which you didn't have before.
Right.
Sounds like a performance standard to me.
Yeah. Well, that's why we asked him for your measurement, what they do to judge it, because we've never had that kind of conversation to know how do you judge your facilities. And even those that aren't HUD facilities will use the same thing for all of our facilities to go, here's how we're gonna set the targets. And it's good information, and he had history with the unit even when he worked with DOLA and others. So it was a good conversation, and we were kind of, I think, dreading. We knew we would made a big difference, but honestly for Lisa and her staff, and he had a lot of praises for Andre and Lisa and just the different interaction over and over again. You didn't know that, she didn't, but he had a lot of praise for them. Again, it goes back to your staff, it goes back to the quality. Yeah, we were pretty happy when we left that. It made my next 3 days off or whatever much better. But it's the entire group, and I think it's just going to continue to be incremental. But I wanted to, after all of the other news, I wanted to let you know they did phenomenal on that, and they've done that with their investor audits and everything else they've gone through. It's been a good year for them, and it's a different world.
Congratulations, yes.
Great news. So is there any more? That's it for your report. Commissioner comments? Do you have any more comments? Do you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.